Humanity, Tier 1.
400 years ago, the Concord judged a species called the Ithran. The Ithran built cities from living coral, sang their history instead of writing it, and had never fired a weapon in anger in the whole of their recorded existence. The Concord classified them Tier 1, primitive, undefended. 6 months later, the Ithran homeworld was a mining colony. Their coral cities were quarried for building material. Their songs were never heard again, because no one who sang them survived to finish teaching the next generation. The Concord recorded the verdict as final. No one ever reopened the file. The Concord of 90 systems had judged 4,000 species since that day. Every verdict was recorded. Every verdict was final. Today, the Concord judged Earth. The chamber was a ring of black glass floating above a dead star. 90 delegates sat in 90 seats. Each seat represented a conquered piece, a stitched-together empire, a fragile truce between predators who had simply run out of reasons to keep fighting each other. At the center of the ring hung a single hologram, a blue-green planet, small, unremarkable, surrounded by 7 silent satellites and 1 flickering radio signal that had only just reached the edge of conquered space. The chief adjudicator was a threll, a being of layered crystal and slow, grinding speech. It had presided over the fall of 11 civilizations. It did not raise its voice. It never needed to. Species designation human, the adjudicator said. Homeworld Sol 3, technology level Tier 1, weapons, chemical propulsion, warp capability, none confirmed. A murmur moved through the ring, not concern, amusement. The Vashkar delegate leaned forward. His name was Karas Thren, Fleet Marshal of the Dominion's 9th Armada, seated in the chamber as a war observer. His skin was the color of scorched iron, his eyes the color of nothing at all. Tier 1, Thren repeated. They have not left their own solar system. Correct, the adjudicator said. Then why, Thren asked, does the Concord waste a session on insects? The chamber rippled with quiet laughter, if laughter was the word for the sound 90 different throats made when they agreed on cruelty. The adjudicator lifted one crystal hand. The hologram of Earth rotated, slow and small. Because insects, the adjudicator said, occupy territory the Dominion wants. The laughter stopped. Thren's eyes narrowed. He had not known that, few in the chamber had. Sol 3 sat at the exact center of 3 trade lanes, 1 dead superhighway of pre-collapse hyperspace beacons, and a mineral belt worth more than 6 annex systems combined. The Dominion had wanted this system for 11 years. They had simply never bothered to look closely at what lived there. They call themselves human, the adjudicator continued. They have fought 2 world wars on their own soil in the span of 30 years, using only chemical weapons and steel. They ended those wars faster than most species end a border dispute. A violent species, then, said the Ithar delegate, coiling closer. Violence without discipline is not strength. It is chaos waiting to be organized by someone stronger. An accurate assessment, the adjudicator said. By Concord standard, they qualify as primitive, uncivilized, unworthy of Concord protection status. A junior delegate, a Corvi representative seated near the outer ring, raised a translucent limb. Has anyone attempted contact? Contact was attempted 11 years ago, the adjudicator said. A single scout vessel was dispatched to their outer system for passive survey. And the result? The scout did not report back. That drew a longer silence than the laughter had. A scout vessel not reporting back was not unusual on its own. Drive failures happened. Debris fields claimed careless pilots, but the Corvi delegate tilted its head, unconvinced. How many scouts in total has the Concord lost near Sol 3? The adjudicator paused. Its crystal form did not have an expression, but the pause itself carried weight. The number is not relevant to today's classification. I would like it read into record regardless. 11, the adjudicator said, across various conquered and non-conquered vessels over a period of 40 years. The chamber went quiet again, but only for a moment. 90 delegates who had built entire empires on the assumption that lost scouts meant bad luck, not bad enemies, were not about to reconsider a species with no warp drive. Coincidence, the Ithar delegate said. Asteroid fields are unforgiving. Debris claims careless pilots every cycle. 11 scouts, the Corvi delegate repeated. Over 40 years. From a system with, by this Concord's own classification, no warp-capable technology. Karas Thrin allowed himself something close to a smile. Then the Dominion may proceed, he said, cutting through the debate before it could grow into something inconvenient, without consequence. The Conquest does not intervene in the affairs of primitives, the adjudicator confirmed. Sol 3 is undefended territory by conquered law. Any empire may claim it. The vote came fast, 87 in favor, 3 abstained, none opposed. Humanity, 3 billion souls who had never heard the word conquered, who had never seen a warp gate, who did not know they had just been sentenced, was declared open territory. Karas Thrin stood from his seat. The 9th Armada will take the system within 1 cycle, he said. I will personally accept their surrender. No one in the chamber objected. The Corvi delegate remained seated after the others rose, watching the small blue-green hologram continue its slow, silent rotation above the ring. It said nothing further. It had learned, over 4 centuries of conquered service, that some silences were worth remembering. Karas Thrin lingered near the chamber's edge as the other delegates filed out, waiting for his aide to finish compiling the Dominion's official deployment order. He had conquered 6 systems in his career. None of them had required more than a single cruiser squadron. He did not expect Sol 3 to be different. Marshal, his aide said, approaching with a data slate. The Conquered archive has a note attached to the Sol 3 file, flagged low priority, filed 11 years ago. Read it, Thrin said. A survey drone operator reported unusual radio discipline from the system, the aide said. Encrypted civilian broadcasts, military-grade encryption, on a species with no recorded space program. Thrin took the slate himself and scanned the note. It was 3 lines long, buried under a decade of routine filings, the kind of detail that meant nothing to a records clerk and everything to a species that had spent 40 years making sure it meant nothing to anyone. Flag it as resolved, Thrin said, handing the slate back. Primitive species mimic patterns they do not understand. It is not unusual. Yes, Marshal. He believed his own words when he said them. That was, later, the detail that would trouble him most. Not that the Conquered had missed the warning, but that he had seen it himself, and dismissed it in under a minute, because dismissing it was easier than questioning a classification the entire chamber had already agreed on. The Dominion had built its empire on exactly that kind of certainty. 91 systems annexed in 3 centuries, each one conquered faster than the last, because every species the Dominion encountered had, by the time first contact was made, already been sorted into a category that told the Dominion exactly how hard to fight. Weak species surrendered. Strong species negotiated. No species in 300 years had ever done both at once, appearing weak enough to attack, while quietly building strong enough to win. Thrin himself had risen through Dominion ranks on the strength of exactly this doctrine. He had commanded the annexation of 3 systems, each one classified Tier 1 or Tier 2 by the Conquered before Dominion ships ever arrived, each one falling within days because the classification had always, without exception, been correct. He did not consider himself cruel. He considered himself efficient, a servant of a system that rewarded accurate assessment over sentiment. That efficiency was the reason the Dominion trusted him with the Ninth Armada in the first place. It was also, though he did not yet know it, the reason he would be the one standing in the Concord chamber 3 days later, explaining exactly how efficient assessment had failed for the first time in his career. He left the chamber that day without a second thought for the small blue-green world on the hologram, already composing the report he expected to file within the week. A routine annexation, completed ahead of schedule, one more system added to a list that had grown too long for any single officer to fully remember. No one in the chamber knew that 11 light-years away, in the dark between Jupiter and the asteroid belt, something had been listening to Concord communications for 6 years. Something that had already started counting down. The Ninth Armada was 1,100 ships strong. It had broken 3 empires in the last 2 decades. Its flagship, the Ash Verdict, was 4 kilometers of black hull and violet weapon ports, built to make surrender the only rational choice a species could make. Karas Thren did not bring the full armada to Sol 3. That would have been an insult to himself. "They have no warp drive," he told his officers, standing on the bridge of the Ash Verdict as the fleet dropped out of transit at the edge of the solar system. "They have no shields. Their strongest weapon is a fission bomb that cannot leave their own atmosphere." His second-in-command, a narrow-faced officer named Vel, checked the sensor returns. 7 satellites detected near their homeworld, Vel said. "No warships, no orbital defense platforms, Ma. Arshal, this will not even qualify as a battle." "Good," Thren said. "Send the Vanguard." The Vanguard was 40 ships. Cruisers, not dreadnoughts. Thren considered even that an overcorrection, but Dominion protocol demanded a show of force before first contact. 40 ships to conquer a species with sailing ships and steel rifles was, in his mind, generous. The Vanguard commander was a young officer named Driss Calvo, eager to make his name. "Target the largest population centers," Calvo ordered, as his cruisers slid into high orbit above the planet designated Sol 3. "Bombardment in 10 minutes. We'll have their surrender by nightfall, their nightfall." His weapons officer hesitated. "Marshal Thren's channel is requesting confirmation before we fire," she said. "Send it," Calvo said. "Tell him the insects are already begging." They were not begging. 200 kilometers below Calvo's formation, a network of listening posts, buried since before Calvo himself had been born, registered the Vanguard's approach the moment it dropped out of transit. Human sensor doctrine did not rely on active scans, the kind that could be detected and triangulated. It relied on decades of passive telemetry, gravity wake analysis, and a simple, brutal truth. Anything massive enough to carry weapons was massive enough to be found, if you were patient enough to look. Project Ember had been patient for 40 years. "Contact confirmed," a voice reported, 300 meters beneath the lunar surface, in a command bunker that did not appear on any human map released to the public. 40 hostile vessels, cruiser class, orbital insertion in 6 minutes. Fleet Commander James Okoro, seated at the center of that bunker, did not raise his voice either. He had learned that from studying every recording Project Ember had ever pulled from a Concord broadcast. Calm was a weapon too. 300 meters above him, inside a hangar carved from solid lunar rock, Squadron Leader Mara Vance sat in the cockpit of an interceptor designated Ember 11. She had trained for this exact scenario more times than she could count, in simulators that recreated Dominion cruiser silhouettes from wreckage schematics she was never told the origin of. "Command, this is Vance," she said. "Confirm we are go for live engagement, not another drill." "Confirmed," Okoro's voice answered. "This is not a drill, Squadron Leader. 40 hostile cruisers closing on Earth orbit. You are weapons-free on my mark, not before." Vance closed her eyes for one breath. Behind her, in 39 other cockpits carved into the same lunar dark, 39 other pilots did the same thing, each of them running the same private calculation, 4 decades of secrecy, and it came down to the next 6 minutes. "Understood," Vance said. "Ember 11 standing by." "All lunar interceptor squadrons," Okoro said. "Stand by. Do not power up until my mark." At that exact moment, 700 kilometers below the Vanguard's cruisers, a series of doors opened on the dark side of Earth's moon. Doors that had not existed in any Concord survey, because no Concord survey ship had ever been allowed close enough to find them. Aboard the cruiser Iron Herald, third in Calvo's formation, a young weapons technician named Dresk Ilvain watched the blue-green planet grow larger on his display, and allowed himself a private thought he would never have spoken aloud to his commanding officer. This felt too easy. He had served through 2 prior campaigns, both against species with active fleets, active defenses, active desperation. This felt different, quiet. The kind of quiet that, in his limited experience, usually meant something had already gone wrong somewhere he could not yet see. "You're tense," the gunner beside him said, noticing. "Just watching the scans," Ilvain said. "Nothing's moving down there." "Nothing's supposed to be moving down there," the gunner said. "That's the point. They're primitives. Enjoy the easy posting while it lasts." Ilvain said nothing further. He kept watching his display anyway, the way a soldier watches an empty tree line even when told, with total confidence, that nothing waits inside it. Calvo's sensors caught the first sign 4 seconds before it mattered. "Marshal," his sensor officer said, voice suddenly tight. "I'm reading power signatures, multiple, point of origin the moon." "The moon has no facilities," Calvo said. "Our scans confirmed that 11 years ago." "I'm reading them anyway." Calvo turned to the viewport. The lunar surface, dark and dead for 11 years of Dominion scans, was no longer dark. 40 points of light rose from craters that had never shown a single structure. Not ships in the way the Dominion understood ships. Sleek, fast, built with an aggression the Dominion had never designed into its own fleet, because the Dominion had never needed to hide what it built. "That's impossible," Calvo said. His weapons officer did not answer. She was already dead, so was the ship around her. The engagement lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes, and 40 Dominion cruisers became 40 debris fields. Karas Thren watched it happen from the bridge of the Ash Verdict, 11 light minutes away, through a data feed that arrived in pieces because the human weapons scrambled Dominion sensors before they even fired. "Replay it," Thren said. His voice did not rise, it went cold instead. "Slow, I want to see every second." The replay showed 40 cruisers in formation. Then it showed 40 human interceptors rising from the lunar dark, moving in patterns the Dominion's tactical computers could not predict, because the patterns were not patterns. They were improvisation, drilled into instinct across 4 decades of simulated combat against an enemy the pilots had never actually met. The humans did not use plasma. They did not use anything in the Concord weapons registry. They used railguns that fired at a fraction of light speed, and warheads that detonated in stages, and something Thren's engineers would later call kinetic saturation. Thousands of small impactors thrown ahead of every capital shot, shredding shields before the real weapon ever arrived. The Dominion's cruisers had shields rated for plasma and beam weapons. They had never needed shields for a storm of steel. Mara Vance brought Ember 11 through the first pass at an angle her Dominion counterparts had no training to anticipate, skimming beneath a cruiser's primary weapon arc before its gunners had finished tracking her. Her railgun round did not aim for the hull. It aimed for the drive coupling, a weakness Project Ember had identified from wreckage analysis a decade earlier and never had the chance to test against a living target. The cruiser's engines went dark first, then its shields, Then, 4 seconds later, the ship itself, in a silent bloom of light that Vance did not stay to watch. "Splash 1, she called, already banking toward her second target. "Ember 1-2, form on me." Not every human pass went cleanly. Ember 17, flown by a young pilot named Casey Nakamura on his first live engagement, drifted a half-second too long lining up a second shot and took a glancing hit across his shield generator. His cockpit alarm screamed red for 3 full seconds before the shield stabilized. 17, report, Vance called, already braking toward him. "I'm still here," Nakamura answered, voice tight but steady. "Shields at 40%, resuming attack run." "Fall back to support position," Vance ordered. "You did your job, let the others finish this one." Nakamura peeled off, breathing hard, watching from a safe distance as the remaining Dominion cruisers began to break apart under the combined fire of his squadron. It was the closest any human pilot came to dying that day, and it was over in less time than it took Dresk Ilving, aboard the Iron Herald, to realize his own ship had gone silent around him. The Iron Herald took its killing blow 11 seconds later. Ilving did not have time to be right about his own instincts. One by one, the cruisers of the Vanguard lit up the tactical display in red, then went dark entirely. Driscalvo's flagship took 4 hits in under a second. The first stripped its shields, the second cracked its hull, the third and fourth simply finished what the first 2 had started. There was no time for a final order, no time for a distress call longer than a single garbled syllable. "Marshal Calvo's ship," Thren said. "Status." "Destroyed in the first 90 seconds, Vel said. His voice had lost its earlier confidence. "All 40 vessels destroyed within 6 minutes. 0 Dominion survivors." Silence held the bridge. "They have no warp drive," Thren said, quiet now. "The Concord records were clear." "The Concord records are 11 years old," Vel said. "Marshal, I do not believe those ships were built in the last 11 years. Hull wear analysis on the wreckage suggests decades of service, not weeks." Thren's officers exchanged glances. They thought he did not notice. "There is something else, Marshal," Vel added, quieter now. "Weapons signature analysis. 2 of the destroyed cruisers registered impacts consistent with IF-pattern railgun tooling." Thren turned sharply. "IF-pattern is a Dominion design, restricted technology." "Not restricted to them, apparently," Vel said. "There were also fragments consistent with Corvi plating alloys, and at least 1 weapon's signature I do not recognize at all." Thren said nothing for a long moment. "Pull all remaining forces back to the edge of the system," he ordered. "No further engagement until I understand what we just found." It was the first order of retreat Karas Thren had given in 19 years of service. It would not be the last. 11 light-years away, in the black glass chamber above the dead star, a Concord observation drone relayed the battle data into the record. The adjudicator processed it in silence for a long moment. "Recalculate the species designation," the adjudicator said finally. "Tier 1 classification appears to be incorrect." The Corvi delegate, still seated from the earlier session, said nothing. It had known this classification was wrong from the moment it had asked about the 11 missing scouts. It did not take satisfaction in being right. It understood, better than most in that chamber, what being right about a species like this actually meant. No one in the chamber laughed this time. 40 years before the Concord ever noticed Earth's radio signals, a single event had changed the course of human history, and no government on Earth had ever spoken of it publicly. A wrecked scout vessel, non-human, had crashed into the Pacific Ocean during a night in the late 20th century. Its hull was not steel. Its drive core was not chemical. It was not supposed to exist. The scout had not come to make contact. It had come to survey, quietly, the kind of survey a predator makes before deciding whether prey is worth the effort. Recovery teams reached the wreck before dawn, working under a communications blackout no one below flag rank was told the reason for. Admiral Thomas Reyes stood on the deck of the recovery vessel as the first section of hull broke the surface, dripping and alien and undeniable. "That's not one of ours," a junior engineer said. Her name was Dr. Alina Marsh, and she would spend the next 30 years of her life inside Project Ember before handing the directorship to a successor she personally trained. "That's not anyone's. Look at the hull geometry. Nothing on Earth extrudes metal in that pattern." "Could be a weather balloon," Reyes said, without conviction, because someone in the chain of command would eventually ask him to say it, and he wanted the sentence on record before the truth made it unusable. "Admiral," Marsh said, "there's a drive core still generating a power signature. It's been in salt water for 6 hours, and it's still generating a power signature." Reyes looked at the wreck for a long moment. "Get it below decks," he said. "Nobody outside this ship hears about this tonight. Nobody outside this ship hears about this for a very long time." 3 engineers and 1 very frightened admiral were the first humans to understand what it meant. Somewhere out past the edge of the solar system, there were civilizations who measured their power in star systems, and none of them had asked Earth's permission to exist. The wreck carried no weapons. It carried instruments, sensors, recorders, a drive core clearly built for stealth rather than speed. It was, unmistakably, a scout. "If this was a scout," Marsh said days later in the first meeting that would become Project Ember's founding session, "then somewhere out there is whoever sent it, and they weren't saying hello. They were taking notes." That night a program began. It had no name that appeared in any budget document. Internally, the few who knew it called it Project Ember because embers, kept hidden long enough, could become a fire no one saw coming. For 40 years, Project Ember operated inside the dark spaces of human industry. Shipyards were built inside hollowed asteroids in the belt, disguised as mining operations. Lunar facilities were carved into craters already marked uninhabitable on every public survey. Entire supply chains, spanning dozens of countries, were quietly rerouted through shell corporations that existed for no other purpose than moving titanium, rare isotopes, and classified alloys to places that officially did not exist. Reverse-engineered alien alloys were folded into human steel. Human railgun doctrine, already decades ahead of anything the stars had ever needed to develop, because humans had spent a century perfecting ways to kill each other efficiently, was scaled up to warship size. Every human government on Earth funded it in secret, without exception. It was the one project that made every rival nation cooperate instead of compete. Not because they trusted each other, because they had all seen the same wreck. The first decade of Project Ember was slow. Reverse engineering a drive system built by an unknown civilization, using only 20th century tools, was closer to archaeology than engineering. Entire teams spent years understanding a single component before they dared to build a second one. 3 test reactors failed catastrophically before the 4th finally held. The second decade was faster. By then, Project Ember had recovered its second wreck, a scout that had strayed too close to the asteroid belt's early listening posts and been quietly, efficiently destroyed by nothing more than a kinetic mass driver disguised as a mining charge. Its wreckage taught human engineers things the first ship never could: shield harmonics, sensor cloaking, the mathematics of gravity-assisted transit that would one day become humanity's signature compression drive. Third decade built the fleet, not in secret shipyards on Earth, where satellites from a dozen nations could still, in theory, notice unusual heat signatures. In the belt, in craters, in places where unusual had already been explained away as asteroid mining decades earlier by careful, patient design. Construction moved at a pace no public shipyard on Earth could have matched, because Project Ember was never bound by public budgets, public timelines, or public oversight. Entire hulls were assembled inside hollowed asteroids using automated fabrication rigs, refined from the 11th recovered wreck's own construction drones, adapted and improved by human engineers who had spent 2 decades learning to think the way an alien shipwright thought. By the fourth decade, the belt facilities could lay a warship's keel and complete final systems integration in under 8 months, a pace that would have shocked any conquered shipyard, had any conquered shipyard ever been permitted close enough to see it. Every completed hull was moved under drift power alone for its final approach into hidden dock, engines cold, running silent against exactly the kind of passive scan Project Ember itself had perfected for finding others. It was, in its own quiet way, the most honest lesson the program ever taught its engineers. The same patience that let humanity find 11 wrecks in the dark was the same patience that kept 400 warships invisible to everyone who might have gone looking for them. The fourth decade trained the crews, 40,000 men and women who believed, most of them sincerely, that they had signed up for deep space engineering contracts. Only the officers and a select few specialists ever learned the truth, and even they were told only as much as their role required. There was one moment, 9 years before the Concord ever noticed Earth, when the entire project nearly ended. A Dominion long-range probe, testing the outer edge of what its own charts marked as unclaimed space, drifted within sensor range of the Belt shipyards. Project Ember's listening posts caught it 40 minutes before it would have caught them. Admiral Renata Cole, then a young operations director, had been the one to give the order. "We have one shot at this," Cole said, watching the probe's slow drift on the display. "If it reports home before we stop it, 40 years of work is finished before it starts." "Kinetic intercept is ready," her weapons officer said. "Confirm firing solution." "Confirm," Cole said. "Make it look like debris, no wreckage larger than a fist." The probe went dark 11 seconds later, its remains scattered across enough kilometers of empty space that no follow-up Dominion survey, years later, would ever connect the loss to anything but an unlucky collision. It became, without ceremony, the 10th of Project Ember's 11 silent kills, and the first Cole personally ordered. She had not slept well for a week afterward, not from guilt, from the sudden, physical understanding of exactly how much now depended on nobody ever finding out. Most of the 40,000 who served under Project Ember never learned any of this. A young engineer named Diego Fuentes was typical of them. He had enlisted for what his recruitment papers called the Belt Infrastructure Corps, expecting to spend his career maintaining mining drones in the asteroid field. He spent his first 2 years doing exactly that, honestly, without complaint, before a superior officer pulled him aside one evening and asked if he wanted to see what he was actually building. "I signed up to fix drone arms," Fuentes said, standing in a hangar large enough to swallow a naval destroyer, staring up at the half-finished hull of a warship with a designation he had never seen on any public registry. "You signed up to fix machines that keep 3 billion people safe," the officer said. "The drones were real, so is this. You don't have to stay, but if you leave, you don't get to remember what you saw tonight." Fuentes stayed. He would go on to lead the propulsion team that built the compression drive fitted to Ember 11, the same interceptor that would, years later, fire the opening shot of the Sol 3 engagement. He never told his family what he actually did for a living. Neither did the other 39,000 men and women who quietly kept the same secret, year after year, because every one of them had, at some point, been shown the same wreck in the same Nevada bunker and asked the same question. None of them ever answered it out loud. Their silence, multiplied 40,000 times over 4 decades, was the real weapon Project Ember had built. The ships were simply where that silence finally became visible. By the time the Concord finally noticed Earth's radio noise leaking into the void, humanity had built and hidden 400 warships, and mapped every weakness a conquered standard fleet was known to have, because Project Ember had, over 4 decades, quietly recovered 11 more wrecks. 11, not one. Every empire that had ever sent a scout too close to Sol 3, testing for weakness, had lost that scout to the asteroid belt's silent defense grid, and never reported home because Project Ember made certain of it. 11 dead scouts, 11 sets of alien technology, 11 civilizations who never knew their probe had simply vanished and never came back to check. Admiral Renata Cole, the current director of Project Ember, stood in the command bunker beneath the Nevada desert as the battle data from Calvo's destroyed Vanguard scrolled across her screen. She had been the third director in the program's history. Her predecessor had held the post for 18 years. Her predecessor's predecessor had been one of the 3 engineers who first opened that Pacific wreck. 40 enemy ships down, an aide reported. 0 losses on our side. Cole did not smile. She had waited 11 years for this exact moment, and relief did not feel like victory. It felt like a held breath finally released. "Wake the fleet," Cole said, "all of it." "Ma'am, the full deployment order. That's 360 ships, every reserve crew we have." "They already know we exist," Cole said. "There's no reason left to hide." She looked at the star map on the wall, at the small red marker sitting at the edge of the solar system, the retreating remainder of the 9th Armada. 40 years, Cole said quietly. "We didn't build Project Ember to defend Earth." The aide looked up. "We built it," Cole said, "to make sure no one who came here ever left to warn the others." She paused, studying the star map a moment longer. "That plan just changed," she said. "They already know. Every scout, every wreck, every secret we've kept for 40 years, none of it matters anymore if we hide now. It's time the rest of the galaxy learned who's been living quietly in this system." The order went out within the hour. Across the asteroid belt, inside 100 hollowed rocks that had spent decades disguised as nothing more than mining claims, reactor cores that had been idling on standby power for years spun up to full output for the first time in their operational lives. Karas Thren had pulled his remaining ships to the edge of Sol 3, expecting time to think. He was given 6 hours. Then human ships stopped waiting for the Dominion to come to them. 360 vessels emerged from positions the Dominion's sensors had never mapped inside the asteroid belt, behind Jupiter's moons, along trade lanes the Concord itself had marked as empty for a century. They came in formation this time. Disciplined, silent, built for exactly this moment. "Marshal," Vel said, voice tight. "New contacts, 300-plus vessels. They're moving to intercept the Armada directly." Thren stared at the tactical display. 40 ships had been a probe. This was something else entirely. "Signal the full Armada," Thren said. "All 1,100 ships, concentrate fire on their lead formation." The Dominion's remaining fleet turned to meet the human advance, still outnumbering the humans nearly 2 to 1. Numbers, Thren had always believed, decided wars. He was about to learn that numbers only decided wars between equals. The human fleet split without warning, not into 2 forces, but into 7, striking from 7 different vectors simultaneously, a formation the Dominion's tactical academies had never taught because no enemy in Dominion history had ever coordinated an attack with such precision. Each of the 7 groups carried its own designation, drawn from a naming convention Project Ember had used in training simulations for 2 decades, Ember 1 through Ember 7. "They're inside our formation," Vel said, disbelief cracking his voice. "Marshal, they're not attacking the flanks, they're attacking the command ships directly." Human railguns tore through Dominion shielding in seconds, not minutes. Kinetic warheads, staged in 3 phases, stripped armor before secondary charges detonated inside the wound. Ship after ship in the 9th Armada went dark on the display. Aboard the human flagship, ease constant, Fleet Commander James Okoro watched the same battle unfold from the opposite perspective. His tactical officer, a woman named Priya Anand, called out enemy formations as fast as her display could update. Ember 3 is engaging their center mass, Anand said. Ember 5 and 6 are wrapping around their flank. Marshal Thren's flagship is pulling back toward the outer edge. Let him pull back, Okoro said. Do not chase the flagship. Focus every group on disabling their capital ships. We want prisoners, not corpses, where we can get them. Sir, disabling costs us more ships than destroying. I know, Okoro said. Do it anyway. The galaxy needs to see we had a choice and made it. It was a decision Project Ember had debated for years, in dry-run simulations that never once expected to be executed for real. Total annihilation would have been faster. It also would have confirmed every fear the Concord already harbored about a violent, primitive species finally let off its leash. Okoro had read every one of those simulation reports personally. He intended to prove them wrong in the one arena that mattered most. Redirect the ash verdict to the rear, Thren ordered on the other side of the battle. I want distance. Marshal, if we retreat the Armada. The Armada is already lost, Thren said. I intend to still be alive to report it. The ash verdict turned, its massive frame slow to answer helm commands built for prestige rather than speed. 2 human interceptors broke off from the main engagement to pursue it, closing the distance faster than Dominion engineers had believed possible for craft of that size. Incoming fire, Vel called out, as the flagship's shields absorbed a railgun strike that buckled an entire deck plate along its port side. Marshal, if they commit to killing the flagship, we will not escape this system. They're not committing, Thren said, watching the 2 interceptors break off after a second volley, falling back to rejoin the main formation instead of pressing the kill. They could have finished us. They chose not to. He did not know in that moment that the order not to pursue high-value targets into open retreat had come directly from Okoro himself, 3 minutes earlier, relayed across every human ship in the system. It was a decision that would cost Project Ember nothing tactically and buy humanity something far more valuable in the days ahead. A surviving Dominion fleet marshal who could testify, in the Concord's own chamber, to exactly what he had witnessed. 300 human ships had entered the battle. Within 40 minutes, 700 of the 9th Armada's 1,100 vessels were destroyed or disabled. The remainder scattered, breaking formation entirely, every captain making the same private calculation Thren had made. Survival now mattered more than the mission. One Dominion cruiser, its engines crippled and its command deck exposed to open space, drifted directly into the path of an Ember 4 interceptor. Its captain, expecting annihilation, transmitted what he believed would be his final words. This is cruiser Vantage Hold requesting terms, the captain said, static crackling through the channel. We surrender. There was a pause before the human reply came. Terms accepted, the voice said. Power down weapons. A recovery team will board within 10 minutes. No one else needs to die today. The Dominion captain sat in stunned silence for a long moment after the channel closed. In 19 years of service, he had never once heard those words spoken to a defeated enemy. Dominion doctrine did not include the concept of accepting a surrender from prey. The victory did not come free. Of the 360 human ships committed to the engagement, 6 were lost outright and 19 more disabled beyond immediate repair. 22 crew members did not survive the battle, a number Okoro read on his display and did not allow himself to look away from, even as the wider engagement tilted decisively in humanity's favor. Ember 4 reports 1 destroyer lost, Anand said quietly. East Halcyon, no survivors. Okoro was silent for a moment. He had known the Halcyon's captain personally, from a training class 2 decades earlier, back when Project Ember's simulations were the only battles any of them had ever fought. Log the names, Akoro said. Every one of them, they don't become a statistic on my watch. On the bridge of the Ease Constant, Akoro watched the Dominion formation collapse. Enemy fleet is routing, Anand said. They're jumping out in groups, no coordination left. Do not pursue into open space, Akoro said. Let them run. Let them report exactly what happened here. Sorry. 40 years we hid, Akoro said. Today they need to know we stopped. The order went out to every human ship in the system. Hold position, let the Dominion retreat, do not chase them home. Not mercy. Message. But the message had a second half. 6 hours after the Ninth Armada scattered, a separate human formation, one that had not taken part in the Sol 3 engagement at all, dropped out of transit at the edge of a System 3 jumps deep inside Dominion territory. 20 ships. Small, fast, built for exactly one purpose. To prove that the Dominion's dark scouting fleet, the 11 Rex Project Ember had spent 40 years quietly claiming, had given humanity something no defensive war ever could. They had given humanity a map. The system was called Corvith Anchorage, a staging depot where the Ninth Armada had refueled and rearmed before its journey to Sol 3. Its commander, a logistics officer named Bassa Orinth, had never fought a battle in his career. He had spent 30 years moving supplies between systems, confident that Dominion territory was, by definition, safe territory. Unidentified contacts, his sensor officer reported. 20 vessels. Configuration does not match any Dominion or Concord registry. Depot defenses, full alert, Orinth ordered, already understanding, with a cold certainty he could not explain, exactly whose ships these were. News of the Ninth Armada's destruction had reached Corvith 6 hours earlier. He had assumed, foolishly, that it meant the enemy would stay home to celebrate. The human strike force did not bombard the depot's population centers. It did not need to. It struck the fuel reserves, the drive repair yards, the weapons magazines, every piece of infrastructure that let the Dominion project force outward from this system into a dozen others. Within 20 minutes, Corvith Anchorage's ability to support another armada was gone, without a single Dominion civilian casualty. They're not trying to conquer us, Orinth said, watching his depot burn on the display, disbelief and something close to awe fighting for space in his voice. They're telling us what they could have done and choosing not to. The strike force commander, a woman named Captain Yusra Bikel, sent a single transmission before her ships jumped back toward human space. This facility supported the fleet that attacked our home, Bikel's voice said, translated automatically into Dominion standard by a system Project Ember had built from 11 decades of intercepted broadcasts. It will not do so again. No one on this station needed to die today. Remember that the next time someone in your chain of command calls us primitive. The transmission was recorded, copied, and forwarded up the Dominion's command structure within the hour. By the time it reached the Concord chamber, it had already been played in every war room across 91 Dominion systems. 20 ships, 1 depot, 0 casualties on either side. It was, in its own way, the loudest thing humanity had ever said to the galaxy. The Concord chamber convened again, sooner than protocol allowed, because no delegate wanted to wait for the scheduled session. Karas Thren stood before the ring of 90 seats, what remained of his uniform still marked with the emergency jump scoring from his escape. Casualty report, the adjudicator said. Its crystal voice, for the first time in Thren's experience, carried something that was not quite calm. Of the Ninth Armada's 1,100 vessels, Thren said, 840 are confirmed destroyed, 190 are disabled or captured, 70 escaped. The chamber did not laugh this time. No one had laughed since the Vanguard's destruction, but this was different. This was silence with weight in it. Casualties among personnel, the adjudicator said. Estimated 190,000, Thren said. confirmed dead or missing. A number that size had not been spoken in that chamber in 3 decades. Not since the Concord's last true war, fought between two empires that had, by the end, simply run out of ships to lose. The Ithar delegate coiled tighter in its seat. This is not possible. Tier 1 species do not field fleets of this capability. The classification was wrong, Thren said. It was wrong from the moment this Concord looked at their radio signals and stopped looking any further. Explain, the adjudicator said. Thren activated the display. Human ship schematics, recovered from disabled vessels, filled the chamber. Weapons systems that combined technology from at least 11 distinct known empires, technology that had never been reported lost, because no empire had ever known where their scouts had gone. They have been recovering our dead for 40 years, Thren said. Every scout this Concord ever lost near their system, every wreck we assumed was destroyed by asteroid debris or drive failure. They took it. They studied it. They built an army from our own mistakes and let us believe they were primitive the entire time. The chamber went still. The Corvide delegate finally spoke, its earlier caution replaced now with something closer to certainty. I asked, 3 days ago, how many scouts this Concord had lost near Sol 3. I was told the number was not relevant. It was not relevant to the classification at the time, the adjudicator said. It was the only number that mattered, the Corvide delegate replied. This chamber has spent 1,000 years measuring species by what they show us. This one understood that and showed us nothing at all. They allowed the Concord to classify them as Tier 1, Thren continued. They allowed the Dominion to attack first. They let us walk directly into a fleet built specifically to break the assumptions this Concord has held for 1,000 years. The adjudicator's crystal form shifted, slow and grinding, the closest thing its species had to unease. The classification was not merely wrong, the adjudicator said. It was engineered. Why? Thren said. By a species with no warp drive. They do not need one, Thren said. Their drives use a compression method none of our engineers recognize. Their fastest ship crossed from their asteroid belt to engagement range in under 6 minutes. That is not Tier 1. That is not Tier 3. I do not have a tier for what that is. He paused, and for the first time since taking command of the 9th Armada, allowed something like doubt into his voice. There is also the matter of Corvith anchorage, Thren said. A staging depot, 3 jumps inside Dominion territory. Struck 6 hours after the Sol 3 engagement by a separate force that took no part in that battle. The chamber stirred at that. Asa Drell's expression, carefully neutral until now, tightened visibly. Casualties at Corvith, the adjudicator asked. None, Thren said. Infrastructure only. They destroyed our capacity to refuel and rearm a second fleet from that position, and left every living being on the station untouched. They had 20 ships against an undefended logistics station, the Ithar delegate said, and chose restraint. That is not the behavior of a species fighting for survival. That is the behavior of a species demonstrating control. Yes, Thren said, that is precisely what troubles me. The Corvide delegate rose from its seat for the first time in the session. I would like the record to reflect something, it said. 400 years ago, this Concord classified the Ithran as Tier 1. They were undefended. They were conquered within 6 months, and their culture no longer exists anywhere in this galaxy. Silence answered that. I raise this, the Corvide delegate continued, because I believe this Concord came within one battle of doing the same thing to a species capable of ending it. We did not spare the humans out of mercy. We attempted to erase them out of habit, and we survived only because they chose to let us. That is an uncomfortable framing, the adjudicator said. It is an accurate one, the Corvide delegate said. I would ask this chamber to consider what happens the next time we classify a quiet species as primitive and are wrong again, and are not shown the same restraint. It let the question sit in the ring for a long moment before continuing. We do not know what the humans would have done if their patience had run out instead of ours, the Corvi delegate added. We only know that it did not. I do not believe this Concord should mistake that outcome for something we earned. A third delegate, representing the distant Haven Compact, spoke for the first time in the entire session. Its voice was thin, translated through a device strapped across its narrow chest. The Compact requests a review of every Tier 1 classification issued in the last century, it said. If this Concord's methodology produced one error of this magnitude, it may have produced others we have simply not yet been forced to discover. The adjudicator did not answer immediately. 90 delegates sat with that request in the silence, each of them privately running the same calculation the Corvi delegate had already finished. How many other quiet, unremarkable systems on the Concord's registry might, in truth, be exactly like Sol 3, waiting only for someone foolish enough to test them? There is one more detail, Thren said. One of my captains was permitted to surrender. His ship and crew were recovered intact, not destroyed. They were offered terms. That drew murmurs from several delegates at once. Terms were not something predators offered prey. Terms were something equals offered each other, when both sides understood that total annihilation would cost more than either side could afford. They didn't just beat us, Thren said quietly. They chose how much to beat us by. That is a more dangerous fact than any weapon in their arsenal. Silence held the ring for a long moment. Thren stood quietly through that silence, turning the Haven delegate's request over in his mind. He thought of the encrypted broadcasts his own aide had flagged and dismissed, 11 years earlier, filed away as an irrelevant curiosity, because questioning it would have meant questioning the entire framework his career had been built on. He thought of Driss Calvo, confident and untested, ordering a bombardment against a world that had already spent 40 years preparing for exactly that order. He thought, most of all, of the surrendering captain of the Vantage hold, and the 10 minutes he had spent waiting to learn whether the humans intended to honor the terms they had offered. They had. Every crew member aboard that ship had been treated, in the captain's own subsequent report, with what he could only describe as unnecessary decency. Decency the Dominion's own doctrine had never trained him to expect from an enemy, let alone extend to one. I would add one further observation to the record, Thren said, breaking the silence himself. In 3 centuries of Dominion history, no species we have ever annexed has offered terms to a defeated enemy. We do not. It has never occurred to us that it might be a demonstration of strength rather than weakness. I believe today it was. The adjudicator's crystal form turned toward him. You believe restraint was a tactical choice, it said, rather than a moral one. I believe, Thren said carefully, that with this species we may not be able to tell the difference, and that uncertainty troubles me more than any weapon in their arsenal. Then the Vashkar delegate who had replaced Thren's authority in the chamber, a senior war minister named Asa Drell, rose slowly from her seat. Recommendation, she said, voice careful. Immediate cessation of hostilities toward Sol 3, full withdrawal from the system, no further Dominion action without Concord-wide coordination. You want to surrender to a species we called insects 3 days ago, the Ithar delegate said. I want to survive, Drell said. There is a difference, and today it became very clear which one matters. The adjudicator did not respond immediately. On the hologram at the center of the chamber, the small blue-green world still turned, slow and quiet, exactly as it had 3 days earlier, except now every delegate in the ring understood that its silence had never meant weakness. It had meant patience. The Concord had never before invited a species to its own sentencing hearing. It invited humanity anyway. The delegate who arrived was not a general, not an admiral. She wore no medals, no rank insignia the Concord recognized. Her name, transmitted ahead of her arrival, was simply Ambassador Renata Cole. She stood in the center of the black glass ring, alone, facing 90 seats that had, 3 days earlier, voted her entire species undefended and unworthy. The Concord recognizes an error in classification, the adjudicator said. Species designation, human, tier level, under review. The Concord offers formal correction and extends an invitation to full protected status. Cole said nothing for a moment. She looked around the ring. At Karas Thren, still standing near his seat, uniform still marked with the mission that had ended his fleet. At Asadrel, who would not meet her eyes. At the Ithar delegate, coiled tight and silent. At the Corvi delegate, watching her with something that was almost but not quite respect. You didn't invite us here to correct an error, Cole said. You invited us here because you're afraid of what we'll do if you don't. The adjudicator's crystal form did not move. That is an accusation, it said. It's an observation, Cole said. We've watched this Concord for 6 years. We know how it works. Power gets protection. Weakness gets conquered. You called us primitive because it was convenient, not because it was true. The Dominion's action was independent of Concord judgment, Drell said quickly. The Concord's judgment made it possible, Cole said. You handed us to them. We just happened to already be ready. No one in the chamber spoke. 40 years, Cole said. That's how long we prepared, after the first ship of yours crashed on our world and we understood what was out here. We didn't build our fleet to conquer anyone. We built it because the first thing your Concord ever taught us, without meaning to, was that no one out here protects the weak. She let that sit in the silence of the chamber. So we stopped being weak, Cole said, quietly, on our own terms, and we waited to see who would come test that. The adjudicator's voice, when it finally spoke, carried none of its earlier grinding calm. What does humanity require, it asked, to consider this matter resolved? Cole looked at the small blue-green hologram floating above them, the one the Concord had once studied for exactly 4 minutes before declaring it worthless. Nothing, she said. We don't need anything from this Concord. We just needed you to understand something so it never happens again. Understand what? The adjudicator asked. Cole turned slow and looked at every seat in the ring, 90 delegates, 90 empires, every one of them now recalculating exactly how far their power actually reached. You don't get to decide what's primitive, she said, just because you never bothered to look twice. The Corvi delegate spoke then, quietly, more to itself than to the chamber. 11 scouts, 40 years, and we called it bad luck. Cole heard it anyway. It wasn't luck, she said. It was patience. Your Concord doesn't have a tier for that either. Asadrel rose before Cole reached the chamber doors. Ambassador, Drell said, the Dominion offers formal apology for the actions of the 9th Armada and requests a bilateral non-aggression accord. Cole stopped but did not turn immediately. We'll consider it, she said, but understand something first. We didn't build Project Ember because we wanted an empire. We built it because. See, your Concord taught us, in a single afternoon 11 years ago, that a species with no fleet has no voice. We're not interested in conquering anyone. We are very interested in never being told again that we don't have a right to exist unless we can prove it with a body count. Understood, Drell said quietly. Cole finally turned back toward the ring one last time. One more thing, she said. The 11 scouts you lost near our system over 40 years, every one of them belonged to a different empire, not just the Dominion. If any of you are wondering whether your own people were among them, the answer is very likely yes. We kept records. If you want them back, ask. We're done keeping secrets that don't need keeping anymore. That single sentence did more damage to the chamber's composure than the entire battle report had. 90 delegates in that moment began quietly recalculating exactly which of their own long-lost scouts had never simply drifted into an asteroid, and had instead been carefully, deliberately erased by the one system in the galaxy every empire had assumed was too primitive to notice. She walked out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed. No one in the ring tried to stop her. Karas Thren watched her go. He would carry the memory of this session for the rest of his career, not the defeat itself, but the moment he understood that the defeat had been planned before he was ever born. Somewhere on a small, quiet planet at the center of 3 trade lanes, a species had learned exactly what the galaxy valued and had spent 4 decades deciding never to be caught without it. 11 light-years away, in the dark beyond Jupiter's moons, 360 human warships held formation, silent, patient, exactly as they had for 40 years before anyone in the galaxy knew their names. They were no longer hiding. Aboard Ember 11, Mara Vance floated in lunar orbit, watching Earth turn slow and blue beneath her, exactly as it had turned for every human who had ever lived without knowing what waited in the dark beyond it. She had grown up believing her grandfather's stories about strange lights over the Pacific were nothing more than family folklore, an old man's tall tale passed down for entertainment. She understood now, flying a warship built from the very wreck those lights had left behind, that some folklore was simply history nobody had been allowed to confirm yet. "Command, this is Vance," she said, keying her comm. "Requesting confirmation. Are we standing down?" Akoro's voice answered, calm as it had been through every minute of the engagement. "Not standing down, squadron leader," he said. "Standing forward. There's a difference now, and I think the whole galaxy just learned it." Vance looked out at the stars a moment longer, at a sky that no longer felt empty, and understood that nothing about her life, or her planet's place among the stars, would ever return to what it had been 3 days earlier. And for the first time since the Concord had been founded, 90 delegates went back to their own systems wondering the same quiet question. What else had been hiding in the Nevada bunker? 3 days after Ambassador Cole's return from the Concord chamber, an alert flagged a report Admiral Renata Cole had not expected to see for years, if ever. "Ma'am," an analyst said, voice careful, "deep array telemetry from the outer belt. We're reading a new contact, not Dominion configuration, not anything in the 11 rec profiles we've cataloged." Cole crossed the room to the display. A single, faint signature sat at the very edge of detectable range, moving with a caution that told her more than any sensor readout could. Something out there had learned, very recently, that Sol 3 was no longer worth approaching carelessly. "Passive scan only," Cole said. "Do not power up interceptors. I want to know who's watching us before we let them know we noticed." "Ma'am, if it's Concord." "It's not Concord," Cole said. "Concord ships announce themselves. This one is trying very hard not to be seen." She stared at the signature a long moment, 40 years of quiet patience settling over her once again, the same patience that had built Project Ember in the dark, one hidden shipyard at a time. "Somebody out there heard what happened to the 9th Armada," Cole said, "and they didn't send an Armada to check. They sent a scout." She turned to the room. "Wake the analysts," she said. "We're about to learn exactly how big this galaxy really is." Within the hour, the faint signature shifted course, retreating back toward the outer dark at a velocity no known Concord or Dominion vessel could match. Cole watched it go on the display, her reflection faint against the screen's pale light. "Track its heading," she said. "I want to know where it came from, and I want a full report before it gets there." "Ma'am, if we can't catch it." "We don't need to catch it," Cole said. "We need to be ready before whatever Senate decides to come back for a closer look. 40 years bought us this system. It didn't buy us the rest of the galaxy." She turned toward the window overlooking the desert night, where somewhere far above the dry Nevada air, 360 ships still held formation in the dark beyond Jupiter's moons, no longer hidden, no longer waiting to be discovered. "Log it," Cole said quietly. 12th wreck unconfirmed. First contact, second time. Let's not take 40 years to be ready for this one. 40 years of silence, 11 recovered wrecks, 0 warnings given, 1 verdict reversed. The galaxy called it a Tier 1 species. The galaxy will not make that mistake again. A 12th wreck was never found. A 12th scout was never lost. It simply watched and went home to report what it saw. Somewhere out past the edge of the dark, something is already reading that report. End of Episode 1. Apex Chronicle will return.